This artist is Hugo van der Goes. This is the Portinari altarpiece. There we go. You can see the whole thing here. It's a triptych. It has the nativity in the middle, and the wings have the patrons and their saints on either side. And there's one continuous space, unlike the Marodi altarpiece. There's one continuous space throughout, so you can see a landscape in the sky. It's the same sky and landscape throughout. Though here, there seems to be a disjunction, but there's a continuation in this arch right here. I guess this figure here is the back of this figure, so it is continuous. The first thing to say, I guess, is that this has the qualities that you've seen in the other Northern Renaissance artist, in that it was a big scene with lots of figures, and all of the surfaces are depicted realistically. All the fabric is depicted realistically with light and shade, and patterns and textures. To a remarkable extent. We'll see some close-up details of this, and it's there are things that are just amazing about the painting of how they observe details. At the same time, it doesn't have perspective in it, the Italian kind of perspective, where linear perspective, where things are accurately rendered in space. There is a kind of a tilted floor look that you see, all the way back to the Marodi altarpiece. The figure of Madonna, for example, with her relationship to the floor and the way the floor is relating to where everything else in the point of view we're looking at it, it has that awkwardness too. It also has an unusual quality of depicting people at different scales. The angels, for example, are at one scale, and the other figures of the story, here's angels back here, are at a different scale. And when you look on the wings, the patrons are at a smaller scale, and the saints that are the namesakes of these patrons are at a larger scale. It has to do with hierarchy of scale. Just as you had that goes back for thousands of years. Many works of art use this as a way to indicate, I guess, importance of different figures. They just put them at a different scale. The odd thing here is that things are so realistic, and the things that are at different scales are in the same space, as if they are just other figures next to, they could reach out and touch each other, yet they're in different worlds in terms of their scale. That's an odd thing. The Ghent altarpiece also had it in the lower part of the inner side with the Adoration of the Lamb. There were some figures of different scales there, but not as contrastingly juxtaposed as you have here. Let's look up close at some of these. The figures of every of the angels, for example, they're individualized. They look like a particular people rather than some generic idealized version. And they are in space, in the same space as these other figures. You see Mary there, Joseph there, and as if they are the same sort of thing, yet they are at a different scale. Their poses, are the sort of things we've seen many times here now, where figures, especially things that people who are kneeling or leaning or crouching in some sort of position where you can't really see where the underlying structure is. The figure here underneath of this angel, for example, is probably on knees, but the knees, you can't see exactly where they hit the ground, and where the legs would be, it's kind of hard to see. It's not even indicated. And this figure is also in this sort of crouching position where the knee is above the ground, but the feet are not indicated, and so you can't see exactly what pose they're in, and it seems like a little bit of an awkward pose. And here, this cope that this angel is wearing is covering up all of that, so as to hide some of that awkwardness. Wonderful representation of different textures. Look at these wings, and there's peacock kind of feathers on the wings. This looks like a parrot's wings with different layers of colors. They want it to be decorative, they want it to be pretty, and they want to show off their technical skill of representing surface textures and whatnot. And the imagination of putting all sorts of things together so as to make, a work that is like a treasure. Here's that sort of odd juxtaposition. Note the shepherds who have come to see the baby Jesus here. These look like real people, particular people. That is, if the artist had gone out and found actual people and copied exactly how they looked, and they did it in such a way as to be unusually sympathetic, as if they thought, these are people worthy of a giant altarpiece and having their portraits made, and made individualized, as if they were the patrons of the thing being, they'd paid for it, just like these people. These have been made, and these are also very realistic, though to a greater extent idealized. Their figure, look at this this woman's figure. You can see that it has been made into some sort of, I guess, a version of idealism where a female figure is turned into a kind of a doll-like look. The same sort of thing, the relationship between this sort of figure and these peasant figures also occurred in the Lindisfarne Gospels. If you remember instances where they showed the peasants looking realistic, being the way the peasants actually looked, and the nobility were depicted kind of like this. When you get down to the surface detail of their face, everybody's surface detail is incredibly observed from nature. Look at the other side real quick. The patron here kneeling, with hands clasped in prayer, looking at this vision of the Nativity, almost identical in pose to the Meroli altarpiece or the Ghent altarpiece, or in any of a number of instances where patrons are shown kneeling, looking. This was the standard way. And of course, this is his son, and an extra son that was born apparently after the composition was made, because he didn't get his own saint, St. Christopher, and I believe this is St. Thomas, named the namesakes of these patrons. Extra imagery in the background of this is the donkey that Mary was riding on as she's pregnant and is coming to. This is the before scene, similar to the way we've seen in another altarpiece earlier. Broderlam's picture with the 4 different scenes all in one space have the same sort of rocks too. They had a certain way of doing that. Look at these stones, all the different textures and things. Oh, and I was going to show over here. There's another scene. This is the Annunciation to the shepherds. This is the angels telling the shepherds, fear not. And I believe these are the wise men coming in. So they have lots of stories being told. And they fill it with a wealth of detail, of nature, observed details, and people, and stories. Let's look at some of the close-ups of these things, different images. Notice how the glares on each of these waves of her hair. All the tiny little branches on trees. This little monster head is because this is an attribute of this saint up here. I believe it's Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth. And I think she's represented usually with a dragon of some kind. The artists go out of their way to show everything of stuff, all the materials, and to contrast also, the wonderful beauty of these man-made fabrics and jewels and treasury things, compared to the stone and all those textures, so as to just to give you a wealth of detail. Here's something just, I see as kind of incredible, is the stalks of wheat. This is amazing here. All of it, it's like each one is observed from nature and is just wonderfully painted. And of course, bread you get from wheat, and the wine you get from grapes. This is a grapevine. Grapevine is being depicted on a ceramic vase here. Are references to the Eucharist, and just as we've seen in other instances of Northern art, they like to hide, or at least disguise symbolic things as actual normal things that you would see in the real world. Little bits of straw on the ground. And show you the figure of the baby Jesus on the ground with these lights radiating from it in a symbolic way, unusual in this scene where everything else is perfectly realistic. This is a symbol of light coming from it, and probably even has gold in it. You kind of see the awkwardness of the figure that we've come to expect from the Northern artists. Here's another image of the shepherds and how they are individualized. They're painted with care, and they even have much more. They're much more alive and expressive and human than the donors are. The donors are sort of stiff poses. They are in their sort of idealized look, or what they imagine is their idealized look. Whereas these look like portraits, sympathetic portraits of actual people. Each one of these flowers, you can read in your book, has a meaning. The different colors, that each one represents different aspects of Mary. Okay, let's go on to the next artist. Is Hans Memling. And this is a portrait similar, I guess you could say, to the Marodi altarpiece again, in that you have a donor and you have Mary and Jesus. Well, you didn't have Jesus. It was just an annunciation in that one. But this is a Madonna and Child portrait on the left, as if it were one single picture, though it's a diptych, and the patron is on the right side. Here's the patron is at the same scale as the holy figure, and is also seen in the same space. This angle here that you see, this is this wall. This is the corner of a room. This is the other corner, or at least the other wall, making a corner, and they meet, I guess, in the space between the two halves of the diptych. You have a window looking out into a distant landscape, and with a, atmospheric perspective, it gets bluer and lighter as you go farther away. And it's it has many characteristics that we've seen before, but it also has a few things that are unique here. One of which is the fact that the patron is at the same scale. Another is that it's made as if the left picture. Let me go a little bit, zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing. The left picture looks like a complete image. That is, it's a complete composition. There's this pyramid going on right here, and the figure of Christ. Everything looks composed and finished here. If you just had this one piece, to this one side, it would look as though this is a complete composition by itself. But if you look back here in the back, there's a circle, and in that circle, you can see it's a mirror. It's a convex mirror, just like you had in the Van Eyck portrait, and we also saw in the goldsmith shop. You see the back of Mary here, but you also see the back of the patron sitting in this room in the same space. They're in a continuous space, And what we see as two frames are actually to the two windows that are surrounding each of these figures. So when we see it from this point of view, we see that mirror. This is where the mirror is. We see the two frames, and it is conceived as if these were two windows we're looking through in the windows of this room, similar to these kinds of windows. So that's a kind of an odd thing. This sort of optical effect we've seen a couple of times now of mirrors, and it's all a piece with observing nature and observing how the real world works and how things look. Of course, you have a figure with all of the surface detail. We can look in more closely at his detail. Not that great of an image here. Here's a close-up of him. The way light falls on his face, all the details in his face, his hair, everything, as we expect now, is exactly the way the person looked, I suppose. And going back to this view of him, it also has the awkwardness. I mean, looking at the size of his head and the size of his hands and the relationship of this arm to his body, there is some awkwardness there. You don't imagine that the artist is concerned at all with the proportions of one part of the body to another, as long as those surfaces of those body parts are rendered beautifully and highly detailed. Wonderful, just little accidental things like this shutter being open to this amount, and this other shutter both open to a little bit more. I don't know why you'd have a shutter with an extra little door on it. I suppose you can have them closed and then just look out like a peephole. But it's at a different angle, and so light hits it differently, and you have all the little studs of the nails, nail heads, and the little hardware things, and the kind of glass that they have. Here's a stained glass image of a saint on a horse. This is Saint Martin, I believe. This is the namesake of this patron, and it's Saint Martin giving part of his cloak to a beggar, and that's his attribute, and so he's there in the place or as an identifier for the name Martin of this patron. You can see the book that he's reading. It's probably a Bible. It has a clasp, very gilt-edged pages, and you can see the writing and how the page curls a little bit. All these observed details are wonderful. This is the words on the frame here indicate apparently the man was 23 years old. Years, I know. It's thought that this is his age at when this was made, and this is his name, Nieuwenhoven, Martin. And this was made in the year 87. Look at the figure of the baby. A little awkward. I don't know. When I use the term awkward, I think it's sort of a value judgment based on looking at it through the eyes of the Italians, because when they look at things, they're looking in terms of the drawing, the underlying structure, showing how things look in space and relationship, proportion, all these things. And when you get used to that look and you look at these, things look awkward because they don't have that in the North. But you have to realize that the people in the North weren't particularly concerned with that. They made many, many paintings without any concern about proportion. They just, because they were so obsessed, I guess you could say, with surface detail, that's what they painted, and that they weren't concerned with proportion and things like that, because they were, because that's just a different concept, a different way of looking at the world. And it makes sense that two different cultures would look at the world differently. But what we're going to see as time goes on is that there's going to be a blending from one to the other. The next artist is Konrad Witz, with a W, and this is an example of his. This is the work that you have for your on your list, and this is it's Jesus and I think the miraculous draught of fishes, and also the Jesus walking on the water with Peter. In the story, Jesus walks on the water, and Peter sees him and comes, and he falls into the water because he looks away. But I think Jesus picks him up, and he can stand on the water again. So there's a religious story being told. This with the figures here, with Christ here, and the fisherman in a boat. But apart from that, looking at the whole picture, this is a small part of the picture. Much of the rest of the composition is taken over to a landscape, the big skyscape. Wonderful depiction of the land and also the water. There's some observed details here. There's some innovations that are remarkable in themselves. As you can imagine these folks in the north competing with one another to observe nature, and whatever one does, the others are required to do that same thing and to add whatever else they can. It says, I'm the first who did this or this. And this is, you can see, is the way water looks is, an opportunity to observe nature. And the artist may have even chosen this scene because it gives you this opportunity that when you look at water from the shore, close to the shore, you can see through the water to the surface underneath. That is the rocks on the bottom, and you can see how they get gradually darker as you get further out into the deeper water. You're looking through more water, and you can't see it as well as but at some point, you start seeing light reflected off the water. So this image here is the reflection of the figures up here, and the image of the boat. The bow of the boat, I guess, is reflected in the water here, and the stern of the boat is reflected in the water here. And then you have the surface details of the way water behaves when it's the rings of waves, the concentric rings, and these, how the bow goes up and down, it creates a sequence of waves, and they are observed exactly how they are in real life. So, there's another thing, is the refraction, looking at Peter's legs underneath the water, they are distorted by the water. So all these are wonderful observed details of nature, in addition to observing this actual landscape. This is a recognizable scene from the folks who saw this picture. They would recognize this mountain and this landscape. It is a particular place that the artist has observed, though he has altered it to a point where it kind of looks, I don't know, I guess it reminds me of these toy landscapes that you see for like an HO scale railroad, where the trees are little toy trees and the houses are little toy houses. It seems the scale or something about the lighting about it that looks, I don't know, looks artificial, but in terms of its details, I'm sure this is exactly what this place looks like. Now, it doesn't have the same degree of observational detail in these figures. I mean, this figure in particular looks rather awkward in terms of the length of his legs and the size of his head, and all these details are a little odd, especially in this one too. They also look like little toy people. So you have this odd combination of not observed from reality, these figures, and very much observed from reality, this is the way the water looks. The figure of Jesus, has the characteristics we've seen before. You don't see the figure underneath, you see the drapery, and the drapery itself is, a tour de force in light and shade modeling. And, the design of it is very much like sculpture. think in particular of Klaus Schluter's sculpture, which you've seen represented as the way artists tend to do cloth and drapery. In just about every instance of these artists, they choose the Klaus Schluter look, I guess, for the way drapery ought to look. It's very expressive, it's very voluminous, and it hides the figure underneath. I give you another example of Memling, and this is his Last Judgment, and in it you can see how he treats figures, because you have all these figures, and they do all look like dolls, though very realistic dolls. The surface details on them are perfectly clear, and the lighting and shading is all perfectly clear and photorealistic to some extent. But the proportions of heads to bodies are like dolls, and so are not realistic. Is another instance of the same artist who did a St. Christopher painting, and it has the same sort of water innovation of seeing through the water close up, but seeing reflections further away. Konrad Witz again in a room, an Annunciation, but in this case the awkwardness is sort of in the space and the way the perspective is rendered. In a way, it's even especially awkward in relation to other northern artists who had interior spaces who were much more convincing than this. Here's another instance of Witz and his in another kind of thing that he painted. This is much more decorative and pretty and treasure-like. But again, figures are kind of awkward, but the surface detail is amazing, I guess you could say. The next artist is Martin Schongauer, and he is a graphic artist. He's not exclusively. He also did paintings, but what we know him for is for his graphic work. Let me zoom out a little so you can see the whole picture. This is the Temptation of St. Anthony. You have a figure in the air. It's like a monk kind of figure in robes, and he is being attacked by monsters from all directions who are just picking at him and pulling at him and biting on him and doing everything they can to, I guess, to get some sort of reaction out of him, whereas his expression is completely impassive. So you have a contrast between the monsters and their action and their ugliness with the calm pose and demeanor of the saint. This was an opportunity for an artist to let loose his imagination and create all sorts of monsters. And you can see that they are very gruesome, very spiky. They're made of combinations of animals, reptiles and birds and fish in particular. I guess this is some sort of like a wild pig's face, or at least snout, and then other things are added to it, and the hairiness of beasts, primate kind of beasts. This might be something like an elephant's trunk attached to the front of a fish. And here's horns like you would have on some sort of, some sort of hoofed beast. But this looking at the shoulder and this neck, it seems to be more like a another kind of beast, like a a predator of some kind. But so many different combinations are put together, so that it's not. It ceases to be recognizable as where it's exactly from. But the folks in the North were really big on this. That is, making up monsters. They were really good at it, even in not just paintings but in literature. Most of the monsters of our culture come from Northern Europe. This is an engraving. Engravings are different. They are on paper, ink on paper, and the way I understand that they started is that in the people who made armor used to decorate armor with by engraving the armor, and they would need to make the same engraving on one side as the other. To if they make a pattern on one, they need to continue on the other. So they put ink in the little grooves, and they put paper on the ink and press it down so as to transfer the image, so that they could transfer it to another part. Anyway, that is essentially what engraving does. You cut a little trough into the surface of metal and then fill it with ink and press paper into it. The ink goes into the paper, and you have one color, black, and against the white surface of the paper. But you can render all sorts of tones using hatching, all these parallel lines to indicate a tone, and then cross-hatching indicates darker tones. And one of the innovations, I believe, of this artist is that he has hatching that are where curved lines are parallel, which is a kind of a difficult thing to do. Apparently you have to move the plate in a circular way in order to get, let's see, there was an instance like this, parallel lines that are curved to one another, so that the lines follow a form. In addition to indicating tone, they also indicating form. I have some other instances of Schongauer's stuff. You can see here's an example of how he did drapery. The drapery is very much like Gothic drapery, with this kind of the harsher kinks than what you see in many of the paintings. Though Konrad Witz, that figure of Jesus we saw earlier, had a similar sort of angular folds in the figure's drapery that others didn't. They were much more natural, organic than these. This is a particular style, which you see a lot in engravings. And another example of a monster, I think, is St. George and the dragon. When you see a bunch of them, you start seeing how the same combination of realism versus awkward doll-like figures or oddly proportioned figures in the same picture, where they, some things are observed, other things are not observed. So we'll end it with this, and then